Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Between the two most populated
Armchair historian video, guys. China's war against India, 1962. I know pretty much nothing about this. So, let's learn. That's what we do here at McJibbin. Let's go. Sorry. The original link to the video, guys, top of the description. Let's learn.
Wars between the two most populated countries are few and far between, but overshadowed by the Cuban Missile Crisis, a fierce conflict raged silently between two Asian giants. It was a clash that reverberated through the majestic peaks of the Himalayas, yet its echoes were muffled by the grand narratives of global history. I'm Griffin Johnson, the armchair historian, and today we'll unveil the forgotten storm that shook the foundations of the East, the Sino-Indian War of 1962. As many post-colonial border disputes normally do, this one begins with the British. The British and China's Qing dynasty had disagreements about where exactly both of their dominions ended. Given that the border was located on the incredibly hard-to-access Himalayan range, it was hard to come to an agreement.
Makes sense.
The disagreement was compounded by the fact that it was Tibet and not China proper.
By the way, guys, I would be super... I want to use the word, like, super anal about it, but don't ban me, YouTube. I would be super, I understand. When it comes to border disputes, I feel like I get it if I was in their position. Because you never know what sort of resources or strategic value a territory will have in the future. You just don't know. And so making a big fuss about, like, which peaks and valleys in the Himalayas are whose, it might seem kind of like, oh, who cares at first, but no, I care. I get it. So I completely get that.
Which bordered British, pounded by the fact that it was Tibet and not China proper, which bordered British India, and Tibet, while de facto independent, was a Chinese vassal. The British would impose their border, the Ardagh-Johnson Line, on the Tibetans, without negotiating with the Qing. Nonetheless, the Qing accepted the borders for several decades. Things remained the same until the late 1800s, when the great game between Russia and Britain was at its climax. To prevent their empires from stepping on each other's toes, the British decided to draw a new line, the Macartney-MacDonald Line, which would put the region of Aksai-Chin under Qing rule. The British would present the offer to Peking, but the Qing never responded to it. In the East, decades later, things would develop similarly, with the British imposing yet another line, the MacMahon Line, on the Tibetans. Once again, the Chinese were not invited. This deadlock would remain until India's independence. The Indians would inherit their colonizers' disputes, with the independence of Pakistan further complicating things. Still, while Pakistan and India never enjoyed good relations with each other, the same could not be said for India and China.
So that makes a lot more sense why this area is so contentious today. If you ever look at, like, world maps and you look over here, it's a jumbled mess with dotted lines and bold lines and whatnot, and who claims what. But that makes a lot of sense now that Britain was negotiating with Tibet about lands. Tibet is part of China now. China probably won't see those negotiations as valid. Even if they agreed to at the time, maybe they'll have some, like, colonial Britain reasoning or whatever. And then you have Pakistan, which is becoming its own country, and Bangladesh later becoming its own. That's not important right now. I'm not calling Bangladesh not important, but with Pakistan becoming a part of India and India becoming free of the British rule and China having Tibet, now all of a sudden this makes a lot more sense.
Enjoyed good relations with each other, the same could not be said for India and China. Jawaharlal Nehru, India's prime minister and a major proponent of the Cold War's non-aligned movement, wanted good relations with China, hoping to establish an Asian axis to act.
India was among the first nations to grant diplomatic recognition to the newly created People's Republic of China. Interesting.
Wanted good relations with China, hoping to establish an Asian axis to act as a counterbalance to the Soviet and American blocs. In the west, the Indians recognized the Johnson Line as the border, as opposed to the Chinese, who recognized the McDonald Line. Furthermore, in the east, the Chinese rejected the McMahon Line, claiming most of the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh. The Chinese took the position that the Tibetan government should not have been allowed to make such a treaty, rejecting Tibet's claims of independent rule. Things would deteriorate rapidly after the Chinese annexed Tibet, eliminating the pseudo-buffer state between the two Goliaths. In 1956 to 1957, China constructed a road through Aksai Chin, connecting Xinjiang and Tibet that ran south of the Johnson Line in many places. The Indians did not learn of this until the road was already completed and Nehru was enraged. While China was posturing abroad, things were not as stable within. Tibetan guerrillas continued to fight their rule, and soon they garnered support from the CIA. This movement eventually ended in a massive uprising in 1959, which the Chinese violently put down, but the Dalai Lama managed to escape, being offered asylum in India. This offer of asylum led to a series of violent border skirmishes between India and China, but both nations kept proposing diplomatic settlements from 1960 to 1962, although to no avail. In response, the Indians established the Forward Policy, establishing advanced posts in disputed areas. The Indians also began requesting military aid from the West to counter the Chinese. The request was denied, as the US thought that the Indians were too soft on communism. Ironically enough, this led the Indians to ask the Soviets for military aid, who, having recently fallen out with the Chinese, agreed. Studies have shown that a good were too soft on communism. Ironically enough, this led the Indians to ask the Soviets for military aid, who, having recently fallen out with the Chinese, agreed.
I know that when Stalin died, and Mao was a big Stalin fanboy, when Stalin died, who was it? Brezhnev or Khrushchev? Who took over after Stalin? Whoever it was much less hardline, Stalinist communism. And so when it changed and Mao saw that they were, kind of saying stuff about Stalin, then they weren't so friendly together. I know that.
Fallen out with the Chinese, agreed. Studies have shown that a good night's rest improves mood, memory, engagement, and performance.
Guys, any ads that are on any of the videos that I watch, please use their promo codes, use their links. It's their stuff. Just please, if this interests you, use their stuff.
Important elements for effective leadership and decision making. That's why I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Beam. Beam's Dream Powder is a delicious hot cocoa for bedtime that is clinically shown to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed with no grogginess. Dream Powder contains ingredients such as L-theanine, magnesium, melatonin, nano-CBD, and reishi to help you relax, and it comes in different flavors and potencies, so you can customize it for your lifestyle. It tastes like a delicious nighttime hot chocolate, contains no added sugar, and is only 15 calories. Running a media company can be stressful, but Dream Powder helps me get a great night's sleep, allowing me to feel focused, decisive, and ready for my workday. Support our channel, click on the link in the description, and use my code ARMCHAIRHISTORY to get 35% off of your first order when you subscribe, and then 20% off of all following orders. Plus, when you subscribe to Dream Powder, you will receive a free frother with your first order. You can pause, skip, or cancel at any time, so there's no risk. Likely influenced by India's invasion of Portuguese Goa, the Chinese resolved that diplomacy was not going to resolve anything and resumed previously banned forward patrols after April 30th, 1962. Chairman Mao Zedong commented, "Nehru wants to move forward, and we won't let him. Originally, we tried to guard against this, but now it seems we cannot prevent it. If he wants to advance, we might as well adopt armed coexistence. You wave a gun, and I'll wave a gun. We'll stand face to face and can each practice our courage." Various border conflicts between India and China flared up throughout the summer and autumn of 1962. In June, a skirmish caused the death of a dozen Chinese troops. On July 22nd, the
Some encounters went better. On the 10th of July, 350 Chinese troops surrounded an Indian post in Chushul, but withdrew after a heated argument via loudspeaker.
Forward policy was extended to allow Indian troops to push back Chinese troops already established in the disputed territory. Commanders were now given the discretion to open the forward policy to the death of a dozen Chinese troops. On July 22nd, the forward policy was extended to allow Indian troops to push back Chinese troops already established in the disputed territory. Commanders were now given the discretion to open fire upon Chinese forces if threatened.
That's a problem with the little stuff that pops up. It's like I don't have the capacity to pay attention and read at the same time, and so I really want to read the little notes, but then I lose my train of thought when watching the video.
Nonetheless, the Indians were confident that a war would not be triggered and made little preparations. India had only 2 divisions of troops in the region of the conflict. Even in September 1962, when Indian troops were ordered to expel the Chinese from Thogla Ridge, Major General J.S. Dillon expressed that a few rounds fired at the Chinese would cause them to run away. As a result, when around 1,000 Chinese surrounded a patrol of 50 Indians at Sola on October 10th, the Indians were in no position to respond. The patrol surprisingly managed to defeat the first Chinese assault, but were eventually defeated. Both sides suffered dozens of casualties, but things could have been worse, as the Chinese held their fire while Indians retreated, and even buried the Indian dead with military honors. The attack was the heaviest fighting to this point, and made it clear that the Chinese were preparing for an offensive. But 6 days later, the Cuban Missile Crisis kicked off and garnered the world's attention. Shielded by a distraction that would likely keep both the US and Soviet Union at bay, the Chinese decided to attack, and on October 20th, 1962, thousands of Chinese troops attacked Indian positions in both the east and western borders. In the east, the People's Liberation Army sought to capture both banks of Namkha Chu River. Indian forces were undermanned and ill-equipped, with only an understrength battalion to support them, while the Chinese troops had 3 regiments positioned on the north side of the river. The Indians expected Chinese forces to cross via one of 5 bridges over the river and defended those crossings. The PLA bypassed the defenders by fording the river, which was shallow at that time of year, instead. The Chinese launched a surprise attack and overwhelmed the Indian troops, which prompted their withdrawal from Namkha Chu. Fearful of continued losses, Indian troops retreated into Bhutan, and the Chinese respected the border and did not pursue. After 4 days of fierce fighting, the Chinese succeeded in securing a substantial portion of the disputed territory. In the west, 40,000 Chinese had crossed into Aksai Chin, where only several thousand Indian troops were garrisoned. The Communists already controlled most of the disputed territory, and late on October 19th, launched several attacks on Indian positions. By October 22nd, all posts north of Chushul had been cleared. After realizing the magnitude of the attack, the Indian Western Command withdrew many of the isolated outposts to the southeast. By October 24th, China had a strong diplomatic position, with the majority of Chinese forces having advanced almost 10 miles south of the control line before the conflict. Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai ordered the troops to stop advancing and attempted to negotiate with Nehru as Indian forces retreated into more heavily fortified positions. Zhou's offer was that both sides would disengage and withdraw 12 miles from their current position, that China and India not cross lines of present control in Aksai Chin, and that China also retreat north of the McMahon Line in the east. Nehru replied 3 days later, expressing interest in negotiation, but was concerned about the mutual 12-mile withdrawal after China had advanced dozens of miles in military aggression. Negotiations stalled once more, and the Indian Parliament announced a national emergency to kick the invaders out, a response that the United States and United Kingdom both supported as they began shipping military aid to India. Fighting resumed on November 14th, with an Indian attack on Walong that inflicted heavy casualties on the Chinese, but did not manage to dislodge them. In the west, the Chinese launched an attack on the 18th of November near Chushul. This attack, alongside another one in Gurung Hill, led to the Indians withdrawing from the area and also from the connecting Spangor Gap. Having reached its claim lines, the PLA did not
Guys, did both countries have your no way.
advance further.
Never mind. Did either country have nuclear weapons at the time? Or did both of them, which I would find a little surprising this early on.
Spangor Gap led to the Indians withdrawing from the area and also from the connecting Spangor Gap. Having reached its claim lines, the PLA did not advance further, and on the 19th of November, it declared a unilateral ceasefire. The Chinese went with the offer Nehru had rejected, retreating to the actual control line and returning most of Arunachal Pradesh. They also only kept a third of what they had taken in Aksai Chin, focusing on just keeping enough to protect the road they built from Xinjiang to Tibet. The ceasefire came just after the Indians had asked for American air support, and soon after, the U.S. aircraft carrier USS Kitty Hawk was ordered back, and
America was definitely like, dang it! You ceasefire? Crap!
American intervention avoided. Neither side declared war.
Dang it! I wanted... Sorry. Just, I've taken on such a nihilistic view of American history recently.
Used their or full avoided. Neither side declared war, used their air force, or fully broke off diplomatic relations, but the conflict is still commonly referred to as a war. While not necessarily a large one, with only a couple thousand casualties on both sides, it did have serious repercussions.
I mean, clearly there were battles, right? And if there are battles, then isn't there a war? So I get that.
Thousand casualties on both sides, it did have serious repercussions. The loss pushed India to modernize its army and begin developing nuclear weapons. The war also alienated Pakistan, which, while had traditionally been a US ally, saw the American aid to India as a betrayal. The end of the Sino-Indian War marked the end of India's forward policy, and the de facto borders stabilized along the line of actual control, where they remain to this day.
Interesting. Guys, I feel like if you are an expert in psychology, then you are an expert de facto in international relations, because international relations to me seem exactly like one-on-one disagreement, like between individuals, right? And I feel like the more kind of up on the kind of military economic totem pole you are, the more complicated it gets. But even complicated foreign policy or international politics, I don't think is that complicated. If you disagree, let me know. But it really it is a cost benefit weighing, or a risk reward sort of thing. The USA, I'm assuming, knew that helping India would hurt their position with Pakistan, but they probably saw the ability to maybe hurt communist China in some way would help them. And it seems like they got the worst end of the stick, being like they were about to help India, but they didn't really that much in the end before the war ended. And then Pakistan is like, what the hell, dude? So that's why I was thinking like America was probably pissed. You need me to come over there? No? Dang it. So they were supporting India, but then didn't really get anything out of it, and then just had Pakistan be like, all right, well, we're not friends anymore. Really interesting video. I'd appreciate any and all comments, guys. I hope you're doing well. I really do. And I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.